Hi, this is Jason T. Ingram. I'm coming to you from my little suburb in Milwaukee, Oregon, and I am a multimedia artist. I was a born again Christian for 20 years. For 12 of that, I was what people call a fundamentalist. I adopted those politics and a lot of those views. However, I was raised in the Unitarian Universalist Church, very connected with the LGBT community and lots of weird artists here in Portland, Oregon. And so I was introduced to the conservative Republican culture and what I call the secular right as well, because I lived in rural America. I lived out in the Kentucky suburbs and places where I was exposed to a lot of people that had the opposite ideas and thinking of what I was raised in. And I was determined to find the good in them because it was weird how demonized these people were when I was growing up. In my world, it was, well, these guys are the haters, these guys are the bigots, and they're all that way. And I still hear a lot of folks in my kind of left wing community that have this aversion towards Republicans and towards those that have more conservative views. And I've loved Republicans. I still do. There's a place in my heart for folks like that. However, we don't share the same views anymore. I came out of the closet as gay, and then I was in a lot of liberal type churches for a while. And then I became a former Christian, and I guess what you call devout, unaffiliated, because I don't want to be absorbed into anybody's theology and have that run my life anymore. And it's given me some time to think about what drew me to that world and what I got from that. And I was like 100% voting Republican, voted for George W. Bush, voted for him again. And I see a lot of things that people on the left side of politics do, and there's still a part of me that can think like a right wing Republican. And I think, these guys are really coming at it wrong because if I was back in my conservative days, that would be completely useless for these people to say things like, not my president, and things like, well, he's orange and he's got small hands and things like that. Okay, well, let's focus on some of the big things here. And what I want to focus on is things that I don't hear a lot of people saying. Unfortunately, I'm not a popular person, and I'm mentally disabled. I've been a struggling artist for years and years, and I'm not a good businessman. I'm not very organized, so I don't put myself out there a lot. So I haven't gotten a lot of exposure at this point. And I find it weird though that when I do say things, yeah, I say a lot of weird, crazy shit. And people ignore me, and I understand. And a lot of folks like me are just plain annoying. And then I say things like, back in March of 2016, I was posting on Facebook, that is why I believe that Donald Trump will be our next president. And then I was really bugging people on social media summer of 2016 about this will be your next president. And I would post pictures of President Trump smiling and looking very professional and all this kind of stuff because most of the pictures you find if you Google Donald Trump, he's angry and he's doing his gestures and he's looking very scary. And so that's what a lot of people see him as. And a lot of people try to portray him as that way too. And that's one of his goals is to scare the majority of the population of the American people. And when he talks, it's like he's shooting arrows, bang, bang, bang. And then he's doing another thing where he's strengthening another group of people. And he happened to find in our generation a lot of Americans who were desperate enough to listen to his rhetoric. And I take myself, let's say if I go back 50 years, which I think is sort of like the opposite. That's why I'm kind of calling the summer of 2017 the summer of fear. Not necessarily the summer of hate, but let's just go back 50 years to the summer of love. There was a disenfranchised, growing counterculture that was very much on the left wing in the United States and other parts of the world too. And it just so happened that a lot of counterculture and a lot of the music and a lot of the things, especially drugs was a big part, was I think a lot of it was related to not only the swinging pendulum of the right and the left, of tradition and progress, and we go back and forth. But we had the baby boom. We had a lot of people that were college age, high school, young adults. And so that was the target audience if you were going to have some kind of cult following. Well, now we're swinging back the other way because what I believe is now I'm seeing this from my right wing brain because I could still tap into it. And I'm seeing this from my present brain, which is my left wing brain. And I honestly see most of the media, most of the mainstream media, as being very liberal. And the litmus test I use for that is the gay stuff. So if they favor the LGBT community, and if they are the politically correct police, and they get somebody on a talk show or something like that who says anything remotely derogatory towards LGBT people, then that is shunned in our society as far as the mainstream. It's not so much the case when I was working in factories and warehouses around Kentucky and Ohio. Um, I was out at some of those places, and most of the time I stayed in the closet for very good reason. But what I'm saying here is that folks on the left, I don't think we really understand how far left mainstream culture has gone in America. And that has weakened us because it's no longer something we're passionate about. It's something we're just used to. We see Ellen DeGeneres on TV, and she's like Lawrence Welk now, just a common person. It's like, oh yeah, whatever, she's a lesbian. Everybody knows her, and she's well loved and tolerated, and no big deal now. 20 years ago it wasn't quite the case for her. And so, yes, we have changed, and this pendulum swings about every 50 years. We have big swings, and then we've got kind of moderate swings in the middle, and then we have these micro swings too. And the swings is when people are fed up with tradition and they want new ideas. And then the problem is that we have all these new ideas, and a lot of them don't work, and a lot of people get really mad, and a lot of the new ideas favor small groups of people as well. So then the majority gets, inspired to try to go back to tradition. And I think that's where we are swinging right now. And I don't think the left wing is prepared for this. I also don't think the left wing is prepared for what Trump is going to do next. And what he's actually doing is something that I don't think most people know what he's really up to. And I'm going to give some worst case scenarios. And that was something I heard like right after he got elected. Was I saw Bernie Sanders, and Bernie was kind of like my savior last year. Oh, Bernie, he's not going to win, but I'm going to put signs out, and I'm going to try to give stickers away to people. And there was so much apathy I noticed as well. And yeah, I don't think he would have done a good job as being president. He would have done better than Hillary, and he would have done better than Trump, in my opinion. But we didn't have a lot of choices last year. And there could have been other reasons behind that as well. Because the powers that seem to control government are changing, and there's always been a lot of folks that have influenced government. I think one of the most interesting examples is Billy Graham. I used to really like Billy Graham. I read his audiobook, if you call it reading, and I was fascinated with how loved he was and respected he was by politics. And he was able to rise above every scandal, which is something that preachers really could not survive scandals after the 1970s. And, maybe it's a little different now, but still, I keep my eye on the religious right. Born again Christians, fundamentalists, whatever you want to call them. I like to call them born again Bible affirming Christians. And that's what I was for 12 years of my life. And if it wasn't for them, I wouldn't be alive today. And there are a lot of reasons why I have a weird love for these people when most people in my community, I work in music and arts and work with the LGBT folks and disabled folks and medical cannabis people and just, a lot of fucking hippies, and I love them. And they get weirded out because I am trying to find ways to build bridges with those who have voted for Trump and no longer support him, and for people that still support him. And so I want to talk about some things about President Trump and some of the things that are a part of his life. I like to see him this way. I don't see him as this orange thing with little hands. Um, I see him as an elderly man who has an addiction to power and who is willing to compromise as much as he can get away with in order to get that power. And he suffers, and I know this sounds like a bad word to associate with somebody like him, he suffers with a personality disorder. And that's really close to my heart because I have a warped personality. I'm very ingrown. I'm incredibly self focused. I have a lot of these issues, and I have been accused of being Trump like. However, the people that accuse me of that are very much addicted to power in some ways. But I do have a really bizarre little kindred spirit with our current president. And one of those things that I hate to say it, but I'm kind of glad he's tearing down some things. I have been on Medicare for almost a decade, and there is so much fake healthcare out there, and there are so many people benefiting from government funds through our healthcare system, which has an incredible influence by drug companies, corporations, and huge, huge, powerful people that are above the law, above government. And it's sad that, yeah, companies like Monsanto and then, and even Disney are, they just operate like bullies, like ASCAP and BMI. They hire bullies. They've got henchmen. They've got this very Gestapo type way that they do business. And yeah, they have an amazing influence on government as well. And so now that we have the what I was calling last year the embodiment of corporate greed, it's really amazing to see this Pandora's box that has been unleashed for the last 6 months here in my country. And it is very, very fucking weird and even surreal at times. And so I like to see things from a different perspective as much as I can, because if I hear too much of one side, then I start to hear the same things over and over again. And so one of the things I wanted to focus on in this video is, well, something else too, is his hand motions. Why does he move his hands the way he does? Is there something significant to the way he moves his hands and his gestures that has to do with his power? And I have some theories about that. They're kind of woo-woo, but I hope to bring as much science as I can with that. The other thing is this whole cult leader thing that I wanted to discuss. And it's been a huge subject because I've been victimized by cultish organizations and individuals who have gotten me sucked in because I was vulnerable, I was desperate, I was needy, and I didn't have a lot of choices. And it's interesting to see this on a huge scale, that we have an entire nation. And a lot of other countries are following this too. And that's another thing too, is that what's going on in the world that has to do very specifically with this Trump thing. And I call it a thing because once you impeach President Trump or even kill him, that is not going to end the agenda that is unfolding here. So yes, we see this bull in a china shop, and he's just, wreaking havoc on our system. And I do admit it. There's a lot of things like this healthcare thing that needed to die. And I think that, well, the problem is that now that they've destroyed it, as of now, we don't have what they call a replacement. And it's going to be really interesting because I just I'm trying to imagine what healthcare would be like if it's worse than it is today. And being on Medicare for the last 8 years or so has shown me the ugly side of healthcare in America, and um, kind of reminds me of I did actually live in Russia, but it was only like 3 months, and it was 17 and a half years ago. And I really, well, it was spring of 2000. Wow. I want to do some videos about talking about Russia because there is a lot of misunderstandings about Russia, as there are a lot of misunderstandings about born again Christians, especially the connection between that. And one of the biggest misunderstandings, especially if you are a baby boomer, has to do with natural sweeteners. So, commercial break. This portion is sponsored by Zevia Zero Calorie Soda, and this is called Dr. Zevia, and it is a non colored, fake flavored, supposed to be like a Dr. Pepper thing. But the reason why I pick on baby boomers, and I still am, because there's so many baby boomers that got way too comfortable after the summer of love. And my generation, I'm kind of born after the summer of love. And then the next generation, there's just been so much apathy. And so, one of the reasons why I'm using this as an example is that I know a lot of people in my parents' generation who are strictly against diet sodas because, well, they're carcinogenic and they're artificial and stuff like that. And for some reason, that since we've had, stevia extract and a lot of these things have been approved for the last several years, and then we got xylitol and maltitol and all these natural sweeteners that are being used. Monk fruit is a really good one too. And then even agave, which is on the border. Still, though, when I offer somebody, hey, would you like this zero calorie natural soda? And they say, no, there's too many chemicals in it. Oh, it's natural. But if it's zero calorie, it's full of chemicals, right? And so there's this presupposition, there's this kind of thought that this is the way I think things are. And if somebody brings me something that challenges that, immediately what I have already been taught before is going to just kick out that new information. And that's what happens when people join any kind of cultish organization or relationship. And that's the way I thought. I had this filter, and the filter was called the Holy Bible. And I had this New Testament and Old Testament. Everything that came into my head was filtered through this ideology. And this ideology was kind of like this monster huge thing that I was a part of, and it saved my life. It was my life. It was everything to me. And their views of the way the Creator is and the way Jesus is was everything to me. And so anything that challenged that, I took it personally as if I was being challenged. My life, everything that was dear to me is being challenged when somebody was saying that they didn't believe in the Bible, and I was trying to convince them and all this kind of stuff. So yeah, I was about as annoying then as I am now. It's just that I'm middle-aged now and I know everything. So, what kind of cults are there? Because most people, when they think of the word cult, they think of religions, and sometimes almost exclusively religions. I have worked for a couple of companies. Well, one of them was like a multi-level marketing pyramid thing. Everybody did one of those in the 90s or the 80s. And there was a lot of cultish type stuff. There was a lot of hype, and there was a lot of stuff that is some more stuff I'm going to be talking about with all this energy that people get from this. And there's strength in that kind of a community. There are cultish governments. And the best example of a cultish government is the Democratic Republic of the Wonderful Happy People of North Korea, or whatever they're called these days. And it's amazing. It's a fake country that is set up and operates like a religious cult, and they have a privileged family. I mean, it's just like, wow, you see the same characteristics of, you can't challenge these people, and they're infallible, and if there's a lie, then they just say, no, we're not lying, they're lying, and then they believe these people. And it's this abuse of power, and it's this whole thing of somebody saying, hey, I'm in power over you, and therefore I can do or say anything I want to. And they challenge their followers and they test them and all this kind of stuff, which is a lot of what President Trump has been doing. He's like thinning out the herd, and he's creating this weird little posse of people. And what's so outrageous about it is that if there was somebody coming here from another planet, or somebody who was just completely unfamiliar with the American government or culture or anything like that, it would be so fun to try to explain to them what happened. Okay, now we got this guy named Scaramucci that came in. They'd be like, Scara what? Are you making this up? No, I promise. Just turn on the news. This is real. Then again, there could be something else going on in the background. So, other kinds of cults. This one, unfortunately, I've got to experience in my life. And this was a one man cult. And a good example of a one man cult is if you're into Star Wars, you've got the Sith. And his Padawan is, I mean, there's the Sith Lord, for instance, like the Emperor, and then you had Darth Vader. And then, of course, Darth Vader, he was going to train somebody else. And then you can go back. I tried to read this book. Oh, I know, it was an audio book about an old Sith Lord, a couple of Sith Lords that was before the Palpatine, whatever his name was. My mind is going blank. I'm like really against Star Wars ever since Disney bought them. I used to be a big fan, and I've purposefully forgot stuff. So, anyways, it was so interesting how this succession of Sith Lords, and they would train somebody, and then that person would kill the Sith Lord and become the new one, and all this kind of stuff. It's very similar to how cultic relationships are. But there's another kind of cultic relationship when there's somebody who is taking this sort of godlike place in somebody's life. And that could happen in sexual relationships because, like sociopathic type, especially men and narcissists, if they are very gifted sexually, and I've seen a couple of these guys in the gay community, and they're amazing, and yet they're amazing at using their sexual abilities to somehow gain power over people. And after a while, they can do anything and get away with it. And I let them do it. And I was in another relationship that was a small business, and it was run that way too. And then there are these cult leaders who are what they call these days the financial gurus. And these are some of the most major things that I see these days. And I know a lot of people that are following these motivational speakers. And when it comes down to it, when you talk to people that follow these men, and when you get to study these men and their lives and their tactics and their power over people, their influence over people, and really they can do sensational stuff. And they also move their hands a lot. In fact, they do things that are very similar to, if you've ever studied the works of Sai Baba is a great example. Oh yeah, and Yogananda. Oh my God, Yogananda. He was like, he had this amazing. He would just talk, and it was like he was this kind of deity, like Moses, like God, like person. Just And Sai Baba was interesting. I think that was him, but there was one where he was put on this big throne and these lines of people in India because, when people are desperate, they go to cult leaders. And a lot of people are desperate in India, and a lot of people are getting desperate in America. So you'll see that. It's like a fucking byproduct of desperation, of a byproduct of greed. So it goes full circle. It's interesting. You see greed, and then you see the rich getting richer, the poor getting poorer, the poor getting so desperate that they will go to some kind of cult leader here who ends up being greedy and takes up all their resources. And so, if we're not careful and if we have a flawed system that we're not being careful with, then we're going to see the disappearing middle class, which is happening. And we're going to see greed on well, we're seeing it on a global level, on a national level, and on a local level. And my hometown of Portland, Oregon, I saw a lot of this gentrification stuff even in the 80s and 90s, but I've never seen it like so full blown. I mean, just every block I go to, they're tearing down an old house and putting up a new one and things like that. And then when you find out about who's doing it and kind of the details, it has to do with mostly, from what I've seen, a lot of greed and a lot of people who can get away with stuff just simply because they have the power and the influence to do it. So, why is Trump doing all this weird shit with his hands? And some people like me, I talk with my hands. I even do that on the phone when I'm on the phone with somebody. Hey, you need to take a left and then you go right and you see that big sign. And of course, they can't see me. It's just a habit. Now, with cult leaders, though, they have the ability, and this is where I'm going to get a little woo woo here, but I believe that the sum total of somebody's possessions and influence and all this other stuff is something that I'm just calling the chi theory. And chi, whether you spell it chi, like, you know, tai chi, or like qigong, qi, whatever, it's kind of an Asian way of saying somebody's electrical field, and it's really kind of hard to prove scientifically. It exists on something invisible that we can't see, that we really can't tap into very easily with our technology, but I believe it's there. And when I do qigong and stuff like this, I can get a sense of what's going on in invisible parts of my body, which also could be a psychological phenomenon. So I have to, realize that as well. Okay, so my chi theory about why these cult leaders move their hands and stuff like that has to do with the flow of energy, and they call these meridians. And so there's meridians that go up kind of like arteries and like nerves, very similar to that. These exist on, for instance, if you have a microchip and you have a bunch of wires going through this microchip, you can't see the electricity going through it, but they're following these paths. And I believe in a similar way, we have electricity that's not the same type of properties as electrical energy, but very similar. And when there is a lot of chi, I mean, when somebody's able to channel massive amounts of chi, which is what a lot of these financial gurus are doing, and which is why a lot of people in certain churches, especially when I was in what they call the full gospel churches, they raise their hands and they put their hands on people and they fall over without even touching them. And I've experienced that on both sides. And there's a lot of fake, and there are some people that really are real. They close their eyes, they have no idea somebody is coming around and putting their hand, maybe a foot away from their forehead, and they feel that massive explosion of this chi energy stuff, and it knocks them on the floor. And of course, their idea is, well, this person's talking about God, and that's the same God that's in the Bible, and I believe the Bible, and that's the same God that I have, and they have this ability that is beyond human, so that must be God. And that's the same thing with a lot of Hindu cults and a lot of other places too. And so, why are financial gurus doing this hocus pocus energy stuff? I was watching I think it was the last presidential debate that they had between Hillary Clinton and Donald J. Trump. And he had some gestures that were so unusual that I've never seen in any kind of setting like that. And I mean, they were making fun of it on Saturday Night Live, how he was like kind of creeping up and he would get tall and then he would get next to her. And it was like, I mean, wow, why is he doing this weird kind of intimidating, like like somebody interrogating a prisoner of war. I mean, it really was unique. So I decided to put on my imaginary chi goggles and see, okay, what if I could see his flow of energy? And he might even be conscious of this on some level. In fact, a lot of people, like Adolf Hitler, for instance, I heard that he would tap into some kind of psychic spiritual stuff, or even heard a voice or voices. And so there are some really intense leaders over the years that were in politics, and yet you can trace some of their interest back to some kind of metaphysical thing or some kind of religious thing. And politics is really big on secret societies. And if you've ever studied secret societies, especially the Masons, and I'm not a real big believer in the Illuminati, but I think it'd be fun to talk about them just so people would watch it because they always want, oh, the Illuminati, da, 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 and all this stuff. Yeah, I'm sure there's a lot of things, when you go further up higher with people of power and influence, you will find more of these secret type things that go on. And yeah, cult leaders are all about secrecy. And I've seen this with my relationships that I've had one on one with a man, a sexual type relationship, and then with a guy who was a business type relationship. Both of them would do something and then tell me not to tell anybody about it. And that puts me in a trapped situation. If I am in a relationship with this person, then that's putting me in a situation where I'm going to have to start compromising my values. And I have no choice. If I'm going to stay in this relationship, I'm going to have to compromise. And I didn't realize that going into it, of course. And so that's another characteristics that you see. Okay, so what is this with Trump in his hands? His tiny little hands. No, I'm just kidding. Look at this. I've got really, really narrow wrists. If anybody has small, tiny, it'd be me. But then again, I've got a 10 key span if I'm really in a good mood, which is an octave and a third. Yay. So I've noticed this with people that are demonstrating a lot of power, that one of the reasons and one of the methods that they use, and this goes back to like when you see wizard movies and stuff like this, and you see, I love the movie The Two Towers, and you have the wizard duel and all this kind of stuff. And there's a little bit of truth into that, I think. I don't think if people wave their hands, they could see stuff coming out, kind of like Doctor Strange. I love the way they visualize the energy that they're creating with portholes in this kind of fiery thing like that. If you've seen the Marvel version of Doctor Strange that came out in 2016, I think a lot of that theology is pretty similar, because you can have people that are devoted to giving their lives to the service of others and the betterment of humanity and all that good stuff, and they're using this force. And then there's a dark side of the force, like in the Star Wars 6 movies. And oh, in the Christmas special from 1978. Um, that's the one thing I didn't like about this whole thing about the Force, is that when I was a Christian, I thought, well, how could it be used for good and for evil? That didn't make any sense. But I think I get that now. I think that it's so easy when somebody gets power, just as like they get money, because when people get more money or they get an influence over somebody else, it has an effect on their chi, and it has an effect on their posture, the way they walk, the way they talk, the way they move their hands. And you can see that in people when you meet people that are strangers. You can kind of get an idea or a feeling of what their social status is and what their wealth is based on how they act, or if they're a deceiver, then they can masquerade their energy. And I've seen this with too. Oh my God. If you've ever been intuitive, if you've ever had the ability to suddenly like go, oh, wait a minute, that person's saying something, but I got a weird feeling and it doesn't seem right. And then you talk to somebody else who's like this total deceiver, a total liar and professional and really good at being a con artist. And then you try to kind of get a feel of their energy, And you just think, whoa, this person has pure white light and love, and they're just so giving and warm and generous and all this stuff. And I've been deceived like that really easily in ways that's like, wow, I cannot believe that I was, being intuitive with this situation, and I was pretty right on, and I was being intuitive with this, and then there was this huge deceiver that was draining the life out of me, killing me, traumatizing me, and yet I would see this person as this source of love and light and pure radiant energy, and oh my God, I can't live without this person. And I watch the characteristics of, whether it's a religious cult leader, whether it's some kind of nonprofit group or whatever it is. Even social groups have cultic tactics. Even, get this, cliques in middle school and high school and bullies. I mean, there's cultic tactics in a lot of different types of settings. But let's translate this to a country like North Korea. And I really like talking about North Korea because how is Trump going to respond to another country that's run by a very, very cultic leader? And I believe that our country is being run by a very cultic leader, but not so obvious as Kim Jong Un or whoever it is now. And I watch President Trump and I think, when I was dedicating my life a handful of times to somebody who was a cultish leader, a narcissist, a sociopath, a con artist, a deceiver, and I, for whatever reason, consciously or not, I would devote my life and my energy, my attention, and my power to this person. And they operate so similar to what our president is doing that if you were to remove this person from power, their power comes from a different source of having the ability to gain the attention of a lot of people. Um, there was a video about artist Ai Weiwei, and they were saying in the video that one of the reasons that Ai Weiwei was able to stand against the Chinese government, who were literally brutalizing this guy, was that his celebrity status protected him. And I was like, wow, well, that's good. Good for him. But what about if somebody who is a very cultic type, con artist type person, and their celebrity status also protects them? We see Martha Stewart and O.J. Simpson, and we have, years and years, especially white men, though, are the ones that seem to get away with the most amount of stuff, as long as they're famous and as long as they have fans and they have a cult following or whatever it is. And I think that that comes with people projecting their attention on somebody actually gives them power. And I was watching Michael Moore, who was somebody who predicted that Donald Trump was going to be president, and he predicted it around the time of the primary elections. I can't remember exactly what it was. I know it was after my prediction, but who am I? I'm not popular. And Michael Moore's popular. And one of the things he said on TV this week was, um, you know, they were talking about, well, what is our anti-Trump? What can we do against Trump to try to undermine his efforts? And Michael Moore was more about, well, let's just everybody just joke about him and make fun of him and all this stuff. And I'm like, oh my God, a lot of people I know, including, like members of my family and folks like that, really think that giving President Trump negative attention is something that he feeds on. And I've seen that. And so there's something I call anti-chi, which is like, taking this amazing, powerful energy that everybody wants and everybody needs and creating this dark side of the force, so to speak, and getting empowered by positive and negative affirmation. Basically, when somebody puts their attention on somebody or something, it grows. And I think that's part of what's happening too. And unfortunately, I'm giving President Trump way too much attention right now because I talk about him for like an hour at a time. So, one of the characteristics of these types of people is that when you do try to take their power away, they've already got this popularity thing going on. So, yeah, they're just going to go from one position, let's say president, and let's say if he ends up, where they want to put him in prison, there's a lot of places around the world that would let him go couch surfing. When I mean couch surfing, I mean like, oh, you could stay in my palace for a year in France or Russia or these islands or whatever. So he's got a backup plan. It would be really hard to put him in prison and keep him there. And one of the reasons why is I kind of get this idea of what would it be like in 2017 if you had villagers and peasants with pitchforks and torches, A lot of his supporters remind me of folks like that. And I have lived and worked amongst rural and working America and middle America type culture. And it's a different world. And they see America. This is interesting because a lot of liberals don't think about it this way. For instance, gun laws. Some guy in a ranch somewhere is thinking he needs a gun because that cougar's going to kill his chickens. And there's like an overgrowth of cougars next to his property. And he needs that gun in order to survive and keep his family safe and whatever. And then we have this group of liberals that are starting all of these gun safety organizations and all of these things. And they get churches involved. What kind of churches? They're churches, well, they're born again Christians, but they're all on the left. They're all, gay affirming, and they're all these types of lefty churches. Like, okay, well, that's not really diverse, is it? And then, like hunting laws is another thing too. Is like in Alaska, when I moved there in 1994, it was this big thing over outlawing the white wolf because this, and then there were some other things where there was places in Alaska where the wolf population, because of human beings tampering with the ecosystem, there was a huge overgrowth of, I think it was wolf, a certain kind of wolf, and then they were killing all these caribou. So these environmentalists didn't realize that, when we have an upset ecosystem, sometimes we have to ask some people to upset another ecosystem in order to balance out the other one. And it's a huge mess. But what I'm saying here is that a lot of liberals are in power because a lot of the power comes from urban areas. And a lot of urban areas are concentrated, especially when you get downtown and you get these uptown artsy fartsy districts, and you get a place like Portland, which I call like the buckle of the unchurched belt. And it's just getting like lefty culture is just getting outrageous. It was like when I lived in Tulsa, Oklahoma 20 years ago, which is what they call the Bible of, the buckle of the Bible Belt. I was going to say the Bible of the buckle belt. So, what we have is we have this urban culture that is making decisions about rural Americans. And under the Obama administration, we saw a lot of that. And when it comes to small populations of disenfranchised people, which I represent a couple of them, medical cannabis, yeah, very disenfranchised, LGBT, disabled people, and, weird experimental artsy fartsy shit. So, yeah, I know what it's like to be in a marginalized subculture that people want to keep us far away. And I know what it's like to have a government that would do things that would favor us, which is like really cool. And I think one of the last like tiny, tiny groups, and we're talking about 1 or 2% of the population, which is, thousands and thousands of people, is the T in the LGBT and this whole restroom thing. And I find that really interesting because it doesn't seem like a big issue. But the reason why I see this transgender bathroom thing an issue is that this is one of the last marginalized groups that we are dealing with when it comes to our liberal agenda. Yay. And so I think it's interesting that there's this shift now because there's almost this feeling, okay, we have one, maybe two more issues that we have not brought visibility to, and then this is when our world is falling apart. I mean, the summer of love and everything we've worked for and all the civil rights and all this stuff is really unraveling quickly. And we've got presidential policies being published over social media and Twitter, out of all things. I've always thought Twitter is so campy and so dorky. When I first heard of Twitter, I thought that's something that your 11-year-old cousin is doing when she gets home from school. She's tweeting. And so that's another thing that makes like dozens and dozens of attributes of this whole nightmare so fascinating. So, President Trump and tweeting policies is another thing that he is trying to do to scare liberals. And he's abusing his power to see what he can get away with. And he's also abusing his power just simply to get attention. And a lot of this is drama. And I can't stand all the attention that this whole Russia thing is getting. I think it's a distraction for what they're really planning on doing. And when I mean them, I mean Trump. Donald J. Trump is one of those types of people that if he sees another, let's say another corporation that's about as big as his or maybe smaller or maybe even bigger, especially if it's smaller. Let's say if there's a corporation that's, a tenth of what he is, he's got the type of, the addiction to power, which is the same kind of addiction that people get when they're acquiring, like a hoarder. He's like kind of like a money and power hoarder. Like hoarders just can't stop hoarding unless they really get some regular medical attention from professional mental health providers, and they have to be willing to deal with all the issues that it comes to hoarding. So now we have this compulsive hoarder in the White House. And another thing about hoarding too is when you're hoarding power, there's also a compulsion about seeing somebody else in power. And if they have absolute power over a huge group of people, when I mean a huge group of people, I'm talking about North Korea. They are a separate entity. And they are so separate from the world. It is like a little, like a Jonestown, like a Jim Jones kind of a thing, where they are devoted to their leader even to the death. And so they very well could be an entire country that could have a mass suicide. There are so many people that are deceived in that country. And I don't know if the majority is, though. However, I believe that if they were to make efforts in North Korea to do some kind of mass suicide for God knows why, however, when people are that addicted to power and when they're that bent in cultish type environments, they're capable of anything. And we've seen that in the history of religion especially. So we have this country, and it's almost like I'm trying to think back to the days, and also there was a friend of mine who was here earlier this year who's a Trump supporter, and he was talking about how mad he was about people in Portland and stuff. And he said, I'm going to leave Portland. I'm going to nuke this whole town. I'm just going to destroy everybody. And that was how angry he was. And that was the way he kind of worked it out in his mind. So there are a lot of guys around the country that have this idea. And I've hung out with guys. I've hung out with a lot of really intense right-wing people. And young right-wing people, too, are really interesting. That's the first time I'd ever heard of Rush Limbaugh was in 1995. And I was driving around with some guys from a church youth group, and they were talking about how cool Rush Limbaugh was. And here these guys are like 18 years old. I thought that was fascinating. I mean, I think of it now as fascinating. Back then, I was like, oh, who's that? I should try to listen to him. So, anyways, when you have, this massive bully in power and you've got another bully in power, then there's going to be this obsession. There's going to be this, wait a minute, he's got so much power over these people and I'm way better than him. I mean, look at Kim Jong Un. He's just got this weird haircut and I am so much more whatever, than him, that after a while, and this could have happened years ago. If I ever become president, I'm going to nuke North Korea because those guys are a threat. And guess what? Oh, and this just really freaked me out because it was about 2, 3, maybe 4 weeks ago. I was thinking, I got to do a video about North Korea because I really think that President Trump has his eyes on North Korea way too much, and not a lot of people are talking about it. And then they started launching these missiles, and then they were like, oh, they're having missiles that are, I mean, maybe they're not even launching missiles at all because we see videos of something and we see something said on the news. We assume it's actually happening. And yes, there's a lot of fake coming from the right, and they're all saying that the left is full of fake and vice versa. I think both sides are fake. Honestly, from my perspective, though, I subscribe to tweets and stuff from Fox News and even the president. So it's an amazing amount of fake that they're doing based on the facts that I have learned about, global warming and all this kind of stuff that I believe. So it's really easy for them to fabricate a fake launch and just put it on TV and scare people and say this is what North Korea is going to do to America unless we do something. And I am reminded of when I was a George W. supporter. I voted for George W. Bush in 2000, and he started a war, and I kind of had to really, I don't know really exactly what I was thinking, but there was a lot of non-thinking, I could tell you that. Because my last year or so in high school is when Operation Desert Storm happened, and I was an anti-war protester. And in fact, even in my household, there was the formation of a political party that still exists. It's way, way on the left. So I have it in my blood, and here I am seeing these wars take place after 9/11 that had nothing to do, at least probably had very little to do with the destruction of a big part of New York City. And then we go to Afghanistan and try to start wars there and other places. And I'm thinking, okay, there's something that's not right here. I think it's just this kind of thing that, these types of people do something bad and they're going to do something bad. So let's go after these types of people, but we're not sure exactly if it's these exact people that did it, so we're just going to kill people that kind of look and act like them. And that's how a lot of wars start. And a lot of wars have to do with religion. Most wars, you can go back and it's some kind of religious ideology. However, communism is not a religion. However, you take religion and politics and say they're both ideologies. So what we have is a war of ideologies here. And it's not just now, it's weird though, because, you know, President Trump, he's anti-Muslim one day and then goes over there and he loves all these people in Islamic countries. And, he seems to favor liberals because he's so close to the entertainment industry and all that stuff. And then he goes over here and he hates liberals. So I don't even think President Trump is necessarily well, he's not a Christian, although he actually claimed to be converted. It was sometime around last summer, I believe. And he just becomes something. He wears the identity of something that he wants to identify with in order to gain attention or influence from certain groups of people. So he's really good at that. I don't even think he's a real Republican. I like Republicans. I think they're awesome people. I think some of their ideas are good. I think their culture is great. I think they have some things about honor and respect that liberals don't quite have as a culture. And so he doesn't seem to follow the core values of what a lot of Republicans believe. And there's such a connection between born again Christian type communities and this and Trump's agenda. They have a lot of similarities, and I've done a lot of videos about that too, because I don't see a lot of people talking about those connections because they're very real. And that's actually one of the things that led me to believe that he was going to be president. Was I was following some people that were born again Christians, some of the folks that were my friends, and then I saw, gay people and black people and women and homeless people, and they're supporting Trump, and I thought, okay, something is going on here. So that's why, if he gets impeached or whatever, he still has a lot of power. In fact, he will have almost as much, or maybe even more power, not being president as he does now, being the president of the United States. So, little break here. How do you tell the difference between liberals and conservatives? Liberals, we love to write shit on our flags. So this one here, it says, this flag is a tribute to my favorite era, 1776 to 2016. Yay! I'm waving my corrupted or dollar store American flag. And it's sad because I've been very patriotic. I have really loved this country to various degrees and for different reasons in my life. When I was a born again Christian, I loved the type of affection they had for this country. And especially when I lived up in Alaska during my 20s, and then living on the American South for a while and going to Bible schools around the Tulsa, Oklahoma area. And I fell in love with those people, and they love the country, and I fell in love with this country. And I've lived in a lot of different states and time zones. I've traveled to, not a lot, 35 or more states. And I can't say I love it the way I did. And I could say that the American government has supported me as a disabled person enough to where I don't kill myself or I don't die. And there's not a lot of attention put on people that suffer, especially with terminal illnesses and chronic illnesses. And that's something that makes me very sad. And so, there's people that say love it or leave it. And it's sad because I'm trying to love it. And I also like to think about worst case scenarios. And one of the things they talked about when, Trump got elected, oh my God, the launch codes, the launch codes. And now people don't talk much about launch codes anymore. They're kind of surprised that, well, he hasn't dropped any bombs, at least not any nuclear bombs in the last 6 months. I mean, he did order some bombs and killed some people like in the first couple months there in the Middle East. It was like, oh my God, you're already launching military strikes. And it's kind of like George W. It's like, the president is not the military leader. They shouldn't be ordering military strikes. But then again, if I was a narcissist and I became president, whether I stole it or not, I'd be doing, oh, I could do executive orders. Oh my God, what should I do first? you know, my first executive order, everything that's low calorie will be sweetened with stevia and not sucralose or aspartame. It is declared, and, that would be me. So what are some of the worst case scenarios? Well, it's very, very, I think we're getting very close to the possibility of bombing North Korea and completely obliterating it. And that would be really sad because I think in order for them to feel like, I think in their twisted mentality, I think that a country like North Korea, because it is so unique and there's so many people there that are devoted to their leader to the death, that there would really find reasons to justify obliterating an entire country like that. And then, of course, we would go over there and try to fix it again. So, one of the things that President Trump is good at, he's good at failing at something and yet succeeding. And this is something I've known with narcissists because I've had so many of them in my life, is that they play a game. So basically, no matter how they roll the dice, they're going to win because they can change the rules, for one thing. They've already made the rules and they've already set up a whole situation that you don't know you're in a game. So basically, like, I'm playing a game of chess and I don't realize I'm in a game of chess until I hear the words checkmate. So if he tries to bomb North Korea, that's going to increase his support for people that are really afraid because it was the same thing. Oh my God, our nation was attacked and we were weak and the Twin Towers are gone and all these people died. It's going to happen again unless we go out and scare them or do something drastic like that and kill millions of people. And it very well could happen again. And it's actually, those kinds of events have been happening a lot in recent history. Some of it is just a simple game of one-upmanship. Because here we have a president who likes to be adored and worshipped. And then he's got this little country on the other side of the Pacific where the leader apparently is adored and worshipped, although, it's fake, but still from his perspective of somebody who thinks he's a god in some ways, and he thinks that he can actually get that type of adoration from a lot of people, that there's going to be this kind of juvenile thing in the back of his head that says he's got to rid the world of that person. And there's another thing going on too, and this is what I really started thinking because I thought, oh my God, when Trump goes over to the Middle East, they're going to kill him. And I was wrong about that. He survived. And I think that a lot of this hugely powerful people, they belong to, a lot of these secret powerful things because when somebody's addicted to power, if they hear a voice that's telling them it's going to get them more power, they're going to be drawn to the supernatural and they're not even going to really care if it's a good or evil force. They just want to know that if they're dazzled with something, like if there's some kind of entity or voice that whispers in their ear, and if it actually is fulfilled or gives them some kind of power or influence, they're going to go back to that voice. It's a little spooky though. Sometimes it could just be the voice of a thought form from an ideology that just, or an idea that says, hey, you know what? If there is a huge group of people that's threatening the world, we need to destroy them all. Like, well, gays, for instance, And one of the reasons why people are afraid of gays, and most of it has to do with a biblical type worldview, is that they think that if a nation or a group or anybody affirms gays as being an acceptable way of life, then that's going to bring the curses of God on everybody in that community. So, like America, that, we make gay marriage legal, that's really freaking out the born again Christians. They were freaked out 20 years ago when I was with them. And they're even more freaked out now. They were powerful. They had a big influence on a lot of things. And now I think even more so. And so that's another thing as well, that all this stuff with the extreme white right wing has been going on for a long time, and it's underground, and you don't see most of it in the mainstream media. You turn on Fox News or some of these other programs, especially the most broadcasting I see from people that are really on the far right and the Republican type folks. And sorry, when it comes to left and right, Apparently, I had a technical glitch and you're only hearing this in one channel. Forgive me. Hopefully, the next video won't do that. But, anyways, on the religious right, what we've got here is we have people who have been marginalized, and yet, over 50 years ago, they were the mainstream. And now, the um, the conservatives, the Republicans, especially those on the far right and what they call the alt right now, is the rebels now. They are the, and I've said this before, like I made a reference to, the whole Palin thing. They're going rogue, and I thought that was so funny. They're on Saturday Night Live, and they're these kind of eccentric, intense, kind of cool people, not the stuffy, Republicans of the past. So they've really changed their image, and they have embraced technology like we were not expecting, because we think Republicans are stupid, but they're not. They're just as smart as folks on the left wing. They just might not be quite as have as many PhDs. And a lot of them, especially folks in the born again Christian realms, are extremely educated, simply because they're constantly being poured into them with all this rhetoric. And so, yeah, they might have doctorates and stuff. And a lot of that stuff is just filtered through their biblical ideology. And it's the same thing with a lot of cultish type groups. So, what's going on with this whole global thing? Well, of course, there are a lot of people for eons who have wanted to take over the whole world. And when you've got somebody with this massive, obvious addiction to power, that, yeah, that's, I'm guessing that's his agenda based on other people I've seen like that. And I don't think everybody wants to rule the world, like Tears for Fears said in the mid 80s. But I do believe that some people really believe that they have the God ordained right and privilege to rule the world, that they have the answers, and that they are going to obliterate everything that they think is evil. And we have a president that's one of those types of people. So that's another worst case scenario, is that he could be involved in some kind of one world government system. And the funny thing about this, the irony, is the fact that most born again Christians really hyper focus on this one world government thing, and they think the liberals are the ones that are going to be forming it. Which there are a lot of liberals who, like the Euro and the European Union, and all the, lots of countries getting together and this kind of stuff. They think that's evil. But when conservatives do it, it's okay if they have a one world government, as long as, it's Jesus instead of this, so it's like, wow. So there is this weird irony of folks on the far right that seem to be having a propensity to destroy the very things that they're trying to protect. And we've seen that in history as well. So, so yeah, one of the worst case scenarios is Trump could, and and this is a bad situation, if Trump attempts or tries to bomb a country like North Korea, which could be one of those, two bullies in school being like, "Oh yeah, well, you think you're so big and you're so cool. Well, I'll show you because I have more power than you." I mean, it's just a massive scale with the same principles going on. It's like the children of Abraham, they had this family duel, and we're still seeing that fucking family duel on a global scale with Islam and Christianity and other groups that identify with one kid of Abraham or one kid of Isaac, and their other kid of Isaac, and they've been battling it out for all these years. So if you want to predict that something's going to happen in the future, you see, where patterns have gone, and yeah, you talk to a psychic, maybe. I don't care. I don't think. I mean, I went to an astrologer last year that said that Hillary Clinton's destined to become president, and well, of course, that didn't really happen. And here's the thing: is that there is such an intense Republican influence, even if there was another Democrat as president. Of course, that would really, really anger a lot of conservatives too, because then they would think it's this whole um, children of Isaac thing, Jacob and Esau, well, one stole it, but it was rightfully his. But then again, the guy who was rightfully his, it really was his, but then again, he really wasn't fit for the part. So you can really say that, God's chosen was one or the other based on, what kind of world you're in and what kind of priorities you have and things like that. And so that could very well happen, especially, oh my God, I actually hope we don't get um, another Democrat in office because it's going to be similar to, this whole Obamacare thing, too. It was, I mean, it's a great idea to have socialized medicine. It works in a lot of countries, just statistically. It's not part of the rise of the Antichrist. It's just something that I think it works. And yet we had a president that came up with this idea, and then they put a name on it. They named it after him, Obamacare, and then uh, they let corporations run rampant and undermine all this stuff. And so that's another example of, sometimes it doesn't matter what kind of president you have in office. Now, here's the thing: what if the vice president becomes a president? Oh my God! So here's something that's interesting. I'm a conversion therapy survivor. I went through 5 years of anti-gay therapy in Christian-based ministry groups and a 7-month residential program and some follow-up with that. And yeah, if there's one thing that's really fucked with my life, it's that. So if there's a guy that has a right to hate born again Christians and Republicans, it would be me. So it's really weird that I love these people. And I also think another worst case scenario would be we would end up in a police state. And a way to start a police state is to start a war. So going back to Palpatine and the Emperor, the first Galactic Emperor, and the whole Star Wars saga. Yeah, he started a war and then started another war and able to get to power, saying, hey, this is a desperate time and desperate stuff calls for desperate measures or whatever that expression is. And it was desperation that caused us in the world to do a lot of things like the Bolshevik Revolution. I mean, they're fighting against the czars, like, oh, we don't want the tyranny of the kings, so we're going to have the tyranny of the communist leaders instead. So, yeah, having a police state, that would be no fun for me because I would be one of the first white guys they would come after. And the sad thing is that yeah, we've never had our government really overthrown like we've seen in other countries before. Like Turkey. I've got a Facebook friend in Turkey who I just love, and I've chatted with him, and it was like, oh my God, there was a coup and the government's been overthrown, people are dying, and it was sort of like, yeah, we have this every now and then. In Africa, it's kind of like, okay, which countries right now are having coups? You can, oh, okay. And if you want to look at a global map and you can't figure out when that global map was made, just look at Africa and see if you see Chad and these countries that are changed. Congo or what I forget. I'm not good at African geography. And I'm not good at predicting stuff, but I like to anyways because this whole YouTube cult leader thing I think is really fascinating because there's a lot of guys on YouTube that do get a lot of power from this stuff. And and they're just as uneducated and unqualified as I am, and I just find it fascinating. And so I'm better at winterizing than summarizing. And I've been doing this for over an hour, and I'm in one channel. In fact, I think I might be able to get you in both channels here. So, unfortunately, if you've been on a device that has one speaker broken and it happens to be the bad one, and you haven't been able to hear anything until now, probably. But to winterize is easy because to winterize something, I just make it warmer. But to summarize, I make it shorter, and I'm so long-winded I can't make stuff very short. However, I will say that I think what we're going through now is a result of just watching greed run rampant in our country, and and I think environmental stuff is having a big effect. And those two things is what caused the depression. And there was a huge liberal to conservative thrust, and there was a huge thrust in Christianity. And what got out of that depression, at least what I've heard, was getting involved in war. And so I really hope we don't see these patterns unfold again. But, based on where humanity tends to go, I wouldn't be surprised. Unfortunately, we have such a global nation now, and technology is connecting us in really weird ways. So cults can be really big. And who would have guessed that a platform like Twitter would be used for a political cult leader to be able to keep his followers engaged on a daily basis? That's just absolutely fascinating and also scary because, the internet was something that folks that were free thinkers used as a platform in order to share ideas. And there's been a lot of really cool ideas that were born out of it, and a lot of content has been shared, and a lot of the underground music that I had to go to Seattle to find these underground records from England that I loved and that changed my life. Now anybody can listen to them if they have an internet connection. Art Bears is one of them. And so, to summarize, we have an elderly man with a personality disorder who is identifying with a very large group of Americans who are hopeless and need a figure. And so, if he dies, then there will still be his family and his supporters that can carry on his agenda. And if he's removed from office somehow, he will still have a lot of followers. And if he does something absolutely horrifying, like, if he tries to launch nuclear warheads, or if he ends up succeeding doing that, believe it or not, I really, really think he would still get support. In fact, 50 years from now, I'm sure there'll be some old guy sitting at a gas station. I still support Donald Trump, who died in 20 out, whatever. And I still think he made the right choice of bombing this country. And we should have let him do this and bomb this country and bomb that country. This world would have been a lot better place. And so that's the weird thing about it, is that even when these people fail, like, he's, he had these companies that failed and he benefited from them. And so when somebody has enough power, even their failures can help them succeed. Even when they lose, they win. And that's the kind of president that I believe we have right now. And I really don't know what the answers are at this point. I just wanted to speak what I feel has been in my heart and is kind of a supplement of because we got the extreme left, extreme right. I've lived on both sides. I love them. I loathe them about as equally. I like to call myself an extreme moderate because I like to have this. I'm extremely opposed to taking one side or the other because I like to be open. I like to keep my heart open to people on the other side. I like to find people on the right wing that are supporting Trump that are also supporting causes that I believe in and trying to get with people. It's very hard, but I think we're in this weird kind of media civil war, and I believe that the violence we're seeing in the street could change into something else very easily, and that kind of anger towards other sides can be transformed into a different type of war. And I don't know what that could be. I just know that these things usually end in bloodshed, and sometimes they just end in the wrong people going into prison, and um, you know, and the guilty end up being in power. And that's typically what happens in these types of situations. And I think we're going to start seeing that a lot more. And I really believe that President Trump is going to unleash some things that people think that he's, you know, done something so horrible that he can't top it. And the next week he does something else. And I think that he's got this circus going on where there's these three-ring circus and he's got all of these things that are taking everybody's attention, but behind the tent he's working on an entirely different show, and we don't know it because we're so enthralled with this circus that's going on. And I just hope that we keep our eyes open. And if there's one thing we can do, turn on your fucking television, turn on your local news, the national news, find out what people are being fed, find out what people are being fed on the far right, on the far left. I listen to those, screaming liberals on Democracy Now! Sometimes, and I hear their views, and then I go and I follow Fox News on Instagram and stuff and find out what they're saying, and then I see the mainstream news, and then I try to find out from other people, and then I make a decision based on all this information. And I wish people would take more of those kinds of objective approaches when it comes to the media.